The station did not orbit a star, it orbited a storm. Below it, the gas giant churned in endless violence, bands of molten orange and bruised violet twisting together, lightning the size of continents clawing upward like something trying to escape. The station hovered just beyond reach, its vast ringed structure gleaming with controlled elegance, as if defying the chaos beneath it. Inside, there was laughter, not the kind born of joy, but of certainty. Play it again. The request came from a being of refracted crystal, its many facets shimmering as it leaned forward. Across the chamber, a projection flickered to life once more. A world appeared, blue, green, beautiful, and then it changed. Storms swallowed continents. Oceans rose like predators. Creatures with teeth, too many teeth, tore into one another in flashes of blood and instinct. The footage shifted rapidly. Fire, ice collapse, impact, then humans. A figure standing in the rain soaked to the bone, laughing, another dragging debris away from a ruined structure. A smaller one, young, falling, crying, and then standing again. The chamber stirred. They persist in that? One delegate murmured, its voice vibrating through the air like distant thunder. They call it home, another replied, amusement curling through its tone. Soft ripples of laughter spread across the assembly. At the center, a long, translucent table pulsed with shifting data. Environmental readouts of Earth hovered above it. Temperature spikes, microbial density, atmospheric volatility. Each metric blinked in warning colors. Unstable, one voice concluded. Hostile, said another. Absurd, came a third. The crystalline delegate tilted slightly, light bending through its body as if considering something mildly entertaining. Then invite one. The chamber quieted. Just a fraction. For study? Someone asked. For context? Another suggested. The crystalline being paused, then emitted a faint chiming sound that passed for humor. For perspective, it said. A beat. Then laughter, louder this time. Perspective? A multi-limbed delegate echoed. From a species that evolved in perpetual disaster? Exactly. The word landed differently, screens shifted. Data recompiled. A designation appeared. Origin world classification. Deathworld. Species, human. The label pulsed faintly. Send an invitation, the crystalline being continued. Frame it as cultural exchange. Let them demonstrate. And if they decline? Someone asked. They won't, another answered quickly. Curiosity is one of their defining traits. More laughter. Yes, the crystalline delegate said almost thoughtfully. Curiosity and survival. It leaned back. Facets dimming slightly. Let us see which one arrives. Far from the station, far from the laughter. A cargo vessel drifted in the quiet between stars. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't impressive. It was functional. Inside, the hum of aging systems filled the narrow corridors. Cargo crates were strapped down in uneven rows, some marked with hazard symbols, others with nothing at all. Elias Varn sat alone in a dimly lit compartment, a metal cup resting loosely in his hand. The liquid inside had long since gone cold. He didn't notice. A soft chime broke the monotony. He glanced toward the console. Message incoming. The ship's system droned. Priority, external diplomatic channel. Elias frowned slightly. That's new, he muttered. He set the cup aside and leaned forward, tapping the display. The message unfolded slowly, its formatting precise. Precise, official, polished, carefully worded. He read it once. Then again. Corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Cultural exchange, he said under his breath. The message continued, filled with formal greetings, layered compliments, and just enough subtle phrasing to feel off, not hostile, not respectful, something else. He scrolled. The invitation described the assembly, the summit, the opportunity to represent humanity among the stars. Then came the line that lingered. To share the unique characteristics of your species, for the benefit and enrichment of all attending civilizations. Elias leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Right, he said quietly. His eyes drifted to a nearby viewport. Outside, space stretched in endless black. scattered with distant light, peaceful, silent, nothing like home. He rubbed a hand across his face, then looked back at the message. There it was again, that subtle edge, like someone smiling just a little too wide. "They don't get it," he murmured. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. Let someone else deal with whatever this was supposed to be. But something about it lingered. Not the invitation, the assumption behind it. Elias tapped a command. "Ship," he said, voice calm. "Plot course to assembly coordinates." A brief pause. "Course set," the system replied. "Estimated arrival, 42 standard hours." He nodded once. As the ship adjusted its trajectory, a faint vibration ran through the hull. Elias picked up his cup again, staring into the cold liquid. "Cultural exchange," he repeated. This time, there was the hint of something else in his voice, not amusement, not irritation, something quieter, more dangerous. Outside, the stars shifted as the ship turned, aligning with a distant point of light barely visible against the void. Elias watched it for a long moment. Then he spoke, almost to himself. "Yeah," he said softly. "Let's see what you find funny." The ship accelerated into the dark, and somewhere ahead, above a storm that never stopped raging, they were still laughing. The station looked different up close. From a distance it had seemed elegant, almost delicate, a halo of glass and light suspended above chaos. But as Elias's ship drifted into docking range, the illusion fractured. The structure wasn't fragile. It was calculated. Layer upon layer of interlocking rings rotated at different speeds, each one compensating for the others. Energy fields shimmered faintly between segments, invisible until the storm below flashed bright enough to reveal them. Massive anchor spires extended downward, stabilizing the station against the gravitational pull of the gas giant. Nothing here was accidental. Everything was controlled. Elias watched through the viewport, eyes narrowing slightly. "Over-engineered," he muttered. "Or afraid." The ship shuddered as it locked into a docking cradle. "Docking complete," the system announced. A pause. "Atmospheric compatibility confirmed." "External gravity 0.7 standard." Elias stood, rolling his shoulders once. "Light," he said, too light. The docking bay doors opened with a silent glide, clean, bright, still. The first thing Elias noticed wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. No clutter. No loose equipment. No exposed wiring. Every surface was smooth, curved, and seamless, like the entire station had been grown instead of built. The air smelled filtered, processed to the point of sterility. He stepped forward, his boots echoed. Too loud. The sound bounced unnaturally off the polished surfaces, lingering just a fraction longer than it should. Elias slowed instinctively, adjusting his stride until the noise softened. Even walking required adaptation. A small group waited at the far end of the bay. Delegates' observers' curiosity made manifest. They didn't approach. Immediately, they watched. Elias felt it. The weight of their attention. Not hostile, not welcoming, assessing. A tall, slender figure moved forward first, its elongated limbs bending with unnatural precision. Its skin shimmered faintly like liquid metal held in place. "Ambassador Elias Varn," it said, voice smooth but slightly distorted, as if translated mid-thought. "Welcome to the assembly." Elias nodded once. "Thanks for having me." A brief silence followed. The delegate tilted its head, an almost perfect imitation of human body language, just off enough to feel wrong. "We trust your journey was survivable." There it was, subtle, polite. But there. Elias's gaze flicked around the bay, tracking exits, noting structural seams, measuring distances without appearing to. "Yeah," he said casually. "Nothing tried to kill me on the way here." Another pause, this one longer. Behind the lead delegate, others shifted. Small, almost imperceptible movements. Limbs tightening, postures adjusting. They heard it. They just didn't understand it. "Please," the lead figure said, recovering smoothly. "Follow us. The summit is already in progress." The corridors beyond the docking bay were even more pristine. Soft light flowed from the walls themselves, shifting subtly as they passed. The floor had just enough give to absorb impact, but not enough to feel unstable. Elias walked in silence, hands loosely at his sides. He didn't stare. He observed. Every junction, every panel, every slight fluctuation in airflow. Twice. He passed recessed compartments, emergency systems probably. Both sealed, both inactive. He filed it away. Your species, the lead delegate began, originates from a high-variance environment. That's one way to put it, Elias replied. We have studied your world extensively, it continued. Its unpredictability is notable. Elias glanced at it. Unpredictable to you? He said. The delegate didn't respond immediately. Clarify. Elias shrugged lightly. If something goes wrong often enough, it stops being unpredictable, he said. It just becomes Tuesday. The corridor seemed quieter after that. They passed other delegates, some paused to watch, others didn't bother hiding it. A cluster of small, multi-eyed beings huddled near a junction, their bodies pulsing faintly as Elias walked by. One emitted a rapid series of clicks, communication probably. Further ahead, a towering mass of chitin and muscle shifted aside, giving him space. Its gaze lingered too long. Elias met it. Briefly, didn't look away first. The creature stilled, not aggression recognition, something. Old and instinctive flickered in the air between them, gone as quickly as it came. Elias kept walking. They entered a wider passage, transparent. Walls revealed the storm below. Up close, it was worse. Vast currents of gas twisted violently, lightning tearing through them in blinding arcs. The scale was impossible. Entire weather systems colliding in slow-motion destruction. Elias slowed slightly, not in awe, in thought. You built all this above that? He asked. Yes, the delegate replied. The location was chosen for its energy potential and visual significance. Elias nodded faintly. Ever lose containment? The question landed like a dropped object, sharp, heavy. The delegate stopped walking. Containment? It repeated. Elias gestured vaguely. To the station, the storm, everything. All of it, he said. You're sitting on top of a system that never stops trying to tear itself apart. Seems like something you'd planned for. A longer pause. Behind them, movement slowed. Conversations faltered. We have extensive safeguards, the delegate said carefully. Elias smiled. Not wide, not friendly, just enough. Yeah, he said. I figured. He started walking again. This time, the delegate took half a second longer to follow. Ahead, massive doors began to open. Light spilled through the widening gap. Brighter, louder, the assembly chamber. Voices echoed inside. Movement, energy, expectation. Elias stepped forward, crossing the threshold without hesitation. Behind him, the doors began to close, and for the first time since his arrival, the station systems registered something new. Not a threat, not exactly, but not harmless either. A flag flickered, briefly across an internal network. Behavioral anomaly detected. Subject human. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. Inside the chamber, the laughter was still there, but softer now, less certain, and Elias Varn walked straight into it. The chamber was built to impress. It rose in vast sweeping tiers, each level filled with beings that defied comprehension, forms of light, of fluid, of shifting geometry and towering mass. Suspended platforms hovered in precise alignment, each tailored to the environmental needs of its occupant. Atmospheres overlapped in shimmering boundaries, like invisible walls separating entirely different worlds. At the center, a circular stage pulsed faintly, responding to the presence of whoever stood upon it. And above it all, a transparent dome revealed the storm below, its violent flashes illuminating the chamber in unpredictable bursts. Power, diversity, control. Elias stepped into it alone. For a moment, the noise continued, low conversation, faint amusement, the lingering echoes of earlier performances. Then someone noticed him. A ripple spread. Heads turned. Bodies shifted. Light dimmed and brightened as attention redirected. The human had arrived. Elias walked forward at an even pace, boots quiet against the responsive floor. He didn't rush. Didn't hesitate, but he felt it. The weight of observation, not curiosity anymore. Expectation. He reached the center platform. It adjusted beneath him, subtly rising just enough to place him in full view of the assembly. A soft chime echoed. Representative of humanity, an amplified voice announced, layered with harmonics from multiple translators. You have been granted the floor. Elias glanced up. Hundreds, no thousands of eyes. Some literal, some not watching, waiting. He took a breath. Not deep, just enough. Name's Elias Varn, he said. No flourish, no performance, just a man speaking. I'm not much of a representative, he added. Didn't know I was one until about 2 days ago. A few scattered sounds, something between confusion and amusement. Good. Let them relax. Behind him, the display field activated. Earth appeared, blue-green, calm. For a moment, it looked like the safest place in the universe. Elias let that image sit. Then he tapped the control at his wrist. The planet changed. Storm systems bloomed across its surface, massive spirals of destruction. Lightning split the atmosphere. Ocean waves rose like moving mountains. A low murmur spread through the chamber. This is a standard weather pattern, Elias said. Another shift. Dense jungle. Movement in the shadows. A predator lunged, fast, efficient, lethal. Life competes, he continued. Constantly. The image flickered again. Microscopic view. Organisms multiplying, invading. Overwhelming. Even the things you can't see are trying to kill you. The murmurs quieted. Elias kept his voice level. No drama, no exaggeration, just facts. A city appeared next. Damaged. Smoking, half collapsed. Humans moved through it, not running, working, clearing debris, carrying the injured, rebuilding. We don't stop, Elias said. The display zoomed in. A man with a bandaged arm lifted rubble. A woman coughed through dust, dragging supplies forward. A child sat crying, then wiped their face and stood. Elias gestured lightly toward them. This isn't special, he said. This is normal. Silence settled, not complete, but heavier. Somewhere in the chamber, a sound, short, sharp laughter. It spread quickly, though not as confidently as before. Your presentation lacks distinction, a voice called out, layered with faint distortion. Other species have demonstrated superior adaptations, strength, energy manipulation, environmental dominance. A few approving sounds followed. Elias turned slightly, scanning until he found the source, a being of layered plates and glowing seams, its form rigid with certainty. Yeah, Elias said. You've got some impressive stuff. A pause. Then he added, almost casually. But that's not what we're good at. The chamber stilled again. Elias looked back at the display. Another image appeared. A human lying in a bed, pale, weak, breathing unevenly. Machines beeped beside them. They get sick, Elias said. The image shifted. The same person, standing now unsteady but upright. They recover. Another shift, a worker, limping, returning to a harsh environment. They adapt. The display darkened briefly, then lit again. A group of humans. Smaller this time, younger, learning, falling, failing, trying again, and when that doesn't work, Elias said quietly, we try something else. The laughter didn't return, but the tension did. It crept in slowly, like something unnoticed at first, then impossible to ignore. A different voice spoke, smoother, colder. You describe persistence, it said, not superiority. Elias nodded once. Yeah, he said. That's the point. He stepped slightly forward on the platform. We're not the strongest, he continued. We're not the fastest. We don't control our environment. A flicker of movement spread across the chamber. Agreement, relief, understanding. Then Elias finished. We just don't stop. The words didn't echo. They settled, heavy, uncomfortable. Before anyone could respond, another delegate spoke, tone sharp with skepticism, then demonstrated. All attention snapped toward the source. A tall, thin being, its form almost translucent, raised a limb toward the center. If your species excels only in endurance, it said, then let us observe it directly. A ripple moved through the assembly, interest returning, Sharper now. Focused. Elias didn't react immediately. He glanced at the display behind him, at the images still frozen there, humans struggling, surviving, continuing. Then he looked back at the chamber. "All right," he said. No hesitation. No negotiation. Just acceptance. "What kind of demonstration?" he asked. The translucent being's form shifted slightly, light refracting through it. "Controlled environmental stress," it replied. "Within safe parameters." "Safe?" Elias almost smiled. "Almost." "Sure," he said. "Let's do it." Around him, systems began to activate. The platform beneath his feet dimmed. Lights shifted. Cooler. Harsher. Somewhere deep in the station, something recalibrated. Watching. Measuring. Preparing. Elias rolled his shoulders once. Loose. Ready. Above, the storm flashed, bright enough to flood the chamber with violent light. For a split second, every shadow sharpened, every shape became clearer, and, in that moment, the assembly leaned forward, expecting a spectacle. Still, thinking they understood what they were about to see. They didn't, and Elias Varn stood, at the center of it all, calm, still waiting. The platform changed beneath his feet. It wasn't sudden. That would have been merciful. Instead, it shifted gradually, so subtly that most of the assembly wouldn't have noticed the exact moment it began. But Elias did. Of course he did. The first sign was the weight. It crept in like an unwelcome thought, barely there at first, then pressing just enough to demand attention. His boots settled harder against the floor. The muscles in his legs tightened instinctively. Gravity increase, mild controlled. Elias exhaled slowly through his nose. "Okay," he muttered under his breath. "That's one." Around him, translucent barriers flickered into place, containment fields isolating the central platform. Data streams appeared in the air, projecting his vital signs in real time: heart rate elevated, respiration steady, muscle strain increasing. The assembly watched, quiet now, curious. The second change came through the air. It didn't smell wrong, it felt wrong. Elias's next breath dragged slightly, like inhaling through fabric. A faint irritation prickled at the back of his throat. His lungs resisted, not failing but working harder. Toxic trace elements, nothing immediately lethal, just enough. He coughed once, sharp, controlled, and adjusted his breathing. Slower intake, shorter exhales, adapt. His eyes flicked upward, scanning the chamber through. The faint shimmer of the barrier, there, stacking variables, he realized, not one. Stressor, multiple dot testing. Overlap testing limits, a faint hum built. Beneath the platform, then came the third change. Light, no. Radiation, not visible, not directly. But he felt it in the way his skin prickled. The subtle warmth that didn't belong. His body recognized it before his mind did. A deep, instinctive warning honed by evolution and survival. His jaw tightened. "Right," he whispered. There it is, above him. The data projections shifted. Cellular stress indicators climbed. Thermal variation increased. Neurological activity spiked. A murmur moved through the assembly. This was the point. Usually, the moment where species faltered, collapsed, proved their limits. Elias bent his knees slightly, not from weakness, from adjustment. He lowered his center of gravity, letting the added weight distribute through his frame instead of fighting it directly. His breathing steadied into a rhythm, short, controlled cycles to minimize toxin intake. He rolled his shoulders once, loosening tension before it could lock in. Every movement, deliberate, efficient, unwasteful, not resisting the environment, working with it. Time passed, seconds maybe. Longer, hard to tell. The chamber remained silent, save for the faint hum of systems and the distant, ever-present rumble of the storm outside. Elias's heart rate climbed higher. His hands trembled, just slightly. Sweat formed along his brow. Trailing down the side of his face, he wiped it away, with the back of his wrist. Didn't look at the data, didn't need to. He knew exactly where he stood. A voice broke the silence. Subject is approaching biological strain. Thresholds, it observed, clinical and detached. Continuation may result in systemic failure. Another voice responded, calmer. Parameters remain within acceptable bounds. Elias almost laughed. Almost. Acceptable, he muttered. His vision blurred for a fraction of a second. He blinked hard, forcing focus back into place. Not yet, not even close. He shifted his stance again, subtle but precise. One foot angled slightly outward, redistributing load. His breathing changed once more, compensating for the tightening in his chest. Adapt. Again. The platform hummed louder. Pressure increased just a fraction. More, enough to matter. His knees dipped, not a collapse. Correction. Muscles strained visibly now, lines of tension running through his frame. The assembly leaned forward, watching for the break, waiting for it. Elias lifted his head, slowly, deliberately. His gaze moved across the chamber, not rushed, not unfocused. Present, aware, still here. That was the part they didn't understand. This wasn't unusual, this wasn't even extreme, this was familiar, not the exact combination, but the feeling, the pressure, the demand on Earth had 1,000 ways to create it. Different forms. Same. Lesson, keep going. A sharp spike flashed across the data. Projections, heart rate surged, oxygen. Efficiency dropped. Neural stress indicators flared, a warning. Tone pulsed through the chamber on but unmistakable. Threshold approaching critical. A system. Announced. Elias's breathing hitched, then stabilized. He closed his eyes. For a brief moment. Just one. In that instant, the chamber disappeared. The weight, the air, the radiation, it all compressed into something simpler. Problem. One more thing to get through. His eyes opened. Again, clear-focused. He straightened. Not fully, not easily, but enough. Enough to stand. The tremor in his hands didn't stop. The strain didn't vanish. Nothing became easier, but he didn't break. Seconds stretched, then more long enough for the assembly to realize something was wrong. Not with him, with their expectations. A low ripple spread uncertainty, replacing earlier confidence. He should have ceased by now, someone whispered. He is exceeding projected endurance. Curves, another replied. Elias heard none of it clearly. Just fragments, noise, irrelevant. He shifted his weight. Again adjusted, endured. Finally, the hum began to fade. Gradually, the pressure eased. The air cleared. The invisible burn of radiation receded. The platform returned to baseline. The barrier flickered, then vanished. Elias stood there for a moment longer, as if his body hadn't yet been informed that it was over. Then his shoulders dropped slightly. He exhaled. Long, controlled. A cough followed. Rough, but brief. He wiped his mouth, straightened his jacket, and looked up at the assembly. No words. None needed. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, uncomfortable, different. No laughter, no easy dismissal, just the growing realization that what they had witnessed wasn't impressive in the way they understood. It was something else. Something harder to measure, harder to categorize, harder to ignore. Elias tilted his head slightly. Is that it? He asked. His voice was steady. Still. Like nothing had happened at all. Across the chamber, no one answered immediately, because for the first time since his arrival, they weren't sure what to say. And somewhere deep within the station's systems, that same flag flickered again, behavioral anomaly detected, projection models failing. Then, a new line appeared beneath it, reassessment required. The silence after the test didn't last. It never did in places like this. But it changed. Not abruptly. Nothing here ever did anything so honest. But in thin layers, like a crack spreading through glass that pretends it isn't breaking yet. Elias stood at the center platform, still recovering his breathing rhythm, when the first warning pulse flashed across the chamber's edge lighting. Not red. Not yet. Amber. A hesitation color. Then another pulse followed it. And another. Somewhere above. The storm outside the dome flared violently, lightning striking in a branching web that lit every tier of the assembly in stark, skeletal brilliance for a fraction of a second. Everything looked exposed, bare, unprotected. Then, the system alarms hit, not soft, not polite, real, a sound that didn't belong in a place designed for observation and ceremony, containment, fluctuation detected. The chamber AI announced. Elias frowned. That wasn't part of the test. He noticed it immediately. The way the floor under him trembled once, like something deep inside the station had shifted its weight. Not structural movement. Pressure change. His eyes lifted. Around the chamber, delegates began to move. At first, it looked like confusion, then coordination, then panic. A section of the far wall flickered, its seamless surface distorting like disturbed water. The air there thickened, turning faintly opaque. A containment field failing. Elias straightened fully. "Hey," he muttered, eyes narrowing. "That's not supposed to happen." A second alarm triggered, then a third, the platform beneath him locked in place. The barrier system flickered back online, but unstable, stuttering, and then it broke. Not the platform, not the chamber. Smaller containment node somewhere. Adjacent, something vented, the air changed. Instantly, Elias felt it before. He saw it. The temperature drop. The pressure imbalance. The subtle shift in chemical composition that made his lungs tighten. Instinctively, he said quietly, "That's bad." Across the chamber, one of the upper-tier delegates collapsed mid-motion. Its body convulsed, systems designed for entirely different atmospheres failing within seconds. Others nearby recoiled, their own protective fields activating too late. Panic didn't start loudly, it spread. Like heat, the chamber that had been composed moments ago fractured into motion, delegates retreating, systems compensating, emergency lighting strobing in uneven bursts. Then the second breach happened and everything stopped pretending. A section of the lower corridor erupted inward, not an explosion, not fire, but a collapse of environmental containment. A wave of incompatible atmosphere surged through. The breach like liquid shadow, and the station didn't shake, it reacted. Bulkheads attempted to seal, some succeeded, some didn't, and where they failed, chaos entered. Elias didn't move at first. He watched, measured, processed. This wasn't part of the demonstration. This wasn't controlled stress, this was failure. Real failure, and it was spreading, a scream, high, distorted. Cut through the chamber as one of the delegates was pulled backward by a failing gravity partition, its form twisting in a direction physics hadn't intended. Systems tried to compensate, failed again. Elias exhaled. Once. Slow, controlled. "Of course," he said under his breath. Then he moved, not toward safety, not toward exits, toward the breach. The first step broke the illusion entirely. The assembly noticed him. Some froze, some shouted, some simply stared as the human, still recovering from the earlier test, walked straight into the collapsing edge of the chamber. Security drone descended instantly. Civilian entity. Returned to designated safe zone. Elias didn't look at it. "Not now," he said, and kept walking. The drone hesitated for half a second. That was all it took for the next section of the station to fail. A corridor junction ahead caved inward, gravity snapping sideways for a moment like a broken rule. Loose debris lifted, then slammed down in a different direction entirely. A group of smaller delegates was caught in it. Elias broke into a run, not fast, not dramatic efficient. He reached the edge of the distortion zone just as a structural beam tore loose from the ceiling. It should have crushed everything beneath it. It didn't, because Elias caught it, not stopped it fully. That would have been impossible, but he changed its path just enough. The beam slammed into the floor beside him instead of the group. The impact reverberated through his arms, up his shoulders into bone and joint like a living thing trying to break him apart. He gritted his teeth. Didn't let go. "Move," he shouted. The stunned delegates scrambled. Behind him, the corridor flickered again. atmosphere destabilizing further. Something in the station was cascading now, one failure triggering another, systems trying to isolate damage but inadvertently accelerating it. A containment seal slammed shut ahead of him, too slow, too late. Elias dropped the beam and sprinted. He hit the narrowing gap as it closed, sliding through just before it locked. On the other side, it was worse. A long vertical shaft, partially exposed to the gas giant's radiation storms, now open due to structural failure. Lightning flashed outside the dome in blinding arcs, illuminating falling debris and drifting bodies. Caught in unstable gravity pockets, Elias looked up once, then down, then moved. No hesitation. Because hesitation didn't exist in places like this, only timing. He grabbed a maintenance rung and pulled himself toward the nearest cluster of survivors suspended in partial gravity failure. One of them drifted toward open space, slowly. Inexorably, Elias launched himself, caught it. The impact jarred his shoulder hard enough to numb his arm. Didn't matter. He anchored himself against a wall segment, stabilizing both of them long enough to drag the delegate into a safer field pocket. "Stay down," he ordered. It didn't understand the words, but it understood tone. Around them, the station continued to unravel in pieces. And somewhere behind it all, deep within the assembly systems, a new alert replaced all others. Critical cascading failure detected, and beneath it, a single line that no one spoke. Allowed non-native subject actively engaging containment. Breaches. Elias didn't see it. He was already moving again, because whatever this was, it wasn't over, not even close. The station was no longer a place. It was a problem collapsing under its own assumptions. Every corridor Elias entered felt different from the last, not because the structure changed, but because reality itself was being rewritten in patches. Gravity tilted sideways for seconds at a time. Air thickened in one breath and thinned in the next. Light flickered as if unsure whether it was allowed to continue existing. And still, the station was big enough that the chaos had room to spread, too much room. Elias moved through it like someone navigating terrain he'd never agreed to call impossible. A section of corridor ahead buckled inward with a metallic scream. Panels peeled away from the walls like skin torn from bone. Behind it, a maintenance conduit vented superheated gas into a pocket of failing atmosphere. Elias didn't slow. He ripped a loose panel from the wall as he ran, wrapping it around his forearm without breaking stride. The metal immediately began to warp at the edges, heat chewing through its alloy. "Not ideal," he muttered. He reached the vent. No time to shut it properly. No time to think about why it failed, so he did what the station was never designed for. He forced it. Elias jammed his armored arm into the ruptured conduit, using his weight to bend the frame back into alignment. The pressure hit instantly, violent, crushing, trying to push him away. His boots slid half a step, then locked. Muscles tightened across his back, shoulders, neck. He held. The system screamed warnings in languages meant for species that didn't improvise under pressure. He ignored them. "Seal it," he growled. Somewhere nearby, an emergency subroutine attempted to comply. But the station's automated systems were already overloaded, prioritizing collapse containment in other sectors, so nothing helped him. He stayed anyway. For a moment, it felt like holding back a living thing. Then the pressure shifted. The conduit stabilized just enough for secondary seals to engage. Mechanical clamps slammed into place around his arm, locking the breech shut. Elias pulled free immediately, shaking off the heat like it was irritation rather than injury. His sleeve was partially fused to the metal beneath it. He didn't look at it, didn't need to. He already knew it was bad. He kept moving. A sharp flicker of light pulled his attention upward. Delegate was falling, not metaphorically. Actually, falling. Gravity in the upper atrium had destabilized into rotating vectors, different sections pulling in different directions. The creature spun slowly through the air, disoriented, drifting toward a fractured structural edge where the station opened briefly into the storm-lit void outside. Elias didn't think. He sprinted again. He reached the edge of the unstable zone just as the rotation shifted. For a split second, he was weightless. Then gravity snapped sideways. He launched himself instinctively, grabbing a structural strut mid-air. His momentum carried him into the drifting delegate. Impact hit hard. The force jolted through his ribs, but he locked his arm around the alien's torso before either of them could spin out. The edge of the station was now directly behind them. Beyond, and the gas giant's storm roared silently. Through the dome's shielding, lightning blooming like fractures in reality. The delegate panicked. Limbs flailing, Elias tightened his grip. "Stop moving," he ordered. It didn't understand. He adjusted his hold, shifting his body to counterbalance the unstable gravity pocket. His boots found a partial anchor point on a fractured beam. He held. Seconds stretched. Systems around them flickered, trying, failing, trying again to stabilize the region. Finally, gravity corrected just enough. Elias pulled them both back into the corridor as stabilizers re-engaged with a heavy mechanical thud. He dropped the delegate onto solid ground. "Stay there," he said. Then he was gone. Again. The deeper he went into the station, the worse it became, not uniformly. That was the worst part. It was patchy, one corridor. Pristine, the next collapsing one. Chamber stable. The next venting atmosphere like a wound that couldn't decide whether it was fatal. He passed a group of security drones, attempting to coordinate containment procedures. One of them turned toward him. "Civilian entity, authorization required." Elias brushed past. "It don't have time," he said. The drone hesitated, then followed him anyway, not to stop him, to track him, because something in its system had already flagged him as the only consistent variable in an inconsistent disaster. He turned a corner into what used to be a service hub. Now it was partially collapsed, lit by emergency strobes that made everything look like it was pulsing between existence and non-existence. 3 delegates were pinned beneath fallen structural ribs. Elias didn't slow. He reached them, grabbed the beam with both hands and braced. For a second, nothing happened. Then his legs sank slightly as he applied. Force Metal groaned. "Not moving enough," he exhaled sharply, adjusted. Footing. Tried again. The beam shifted, just a few centimeters, enough for one of the trapped beings to crawl free. It hesitated. Elias shouted, "Sharper now, go!" It moved. He held the beam longer than his body wanted to, long enough for the second to escape. Then the third. Only when they were clear did he let go, the beam slamming back down with a sound like judgment. Elias stepped back, breathing heavier now, sweat mixed with grime and heat damage along his arms. His body was starting to complain in earnest. He ignored it because the station was still failing, and somewhere deeper, something critical had just gone offline. A final system. Alert flashed across scattered surviving displays. Core containment integrity, 41%. And falling, Julius looked up toward the direction of the message, then started walking again. Not because he knew what to do next, but because stopping wasn't an option that existed in him. Behind him, the station continued to break. Ahead of him, it waited. The deeper core levels of the station were never meant to be seen during a crisis. They were supposed to be untouched, controlled, invisible, beneath layers of redundancy and confidence. Now they were neither. Elias stepped through a security bulkhead that had given up, pretending it was still functional. The door hung half open, twisted slightly on its frame, as if it had tried to decide between sealing shut and running away. Inside, the air was different, not just damaged, wrong in a structured way. Systems here still functioned, but only in fragments. Lights flickered in uneven rhythms. Emergency holograms attempted to form and failed mid-thought. The floor vibrated faintly under the strain of distant, structural stress. And silence. Not peace. Absence, the kind that came after something important, had already broken. Elias paused just inside the threshold. His breathing was heavier now, controlled but no longer effortless. The earlier strain had accumulated, muscles tightening in places he hadn't had time to acknowledge. He rolled his shoulder once, winced slightly, then kept moving. A corridor stretched ahead, lined with transparent observation panels. On the other side, nothing, or rather, nothing moving. Delegates lay scattered in emergency alcoves, some unconscious, some motionless in positions that suggested rapid evacuation attempts interrupted mid-action. Medical drones hovered uncertainly, their routines overloaded, unable to prioritize between conflicting failures. Elias slowed, Not because he had to, because he saw them, a small cluster of alien forms near a collapsed support node. One still alive, barely, its chest rising in uneven intervals as a failing life support field flickered around it like a dying thought. Without hesitation, he moved, kneeled, checked the field emitter. Broken. Of course it was. He looked around quickly, scanning for anything usable. A fractured energy conduit pulsed weakly nearby, sparking intermittently. He grabbed it, rerouted power manually. Ignoring the brief jolt that ran up his arm, the field stabilized, just enough to hold the creature's breathing. Steadied. Elias exhaled once, moved on. No celebration, no pause. There wasn't time for either. As he advanced deeper, the station's structural integrity worsened in subtle ways. Not explosive collapse. Fatigue. The kind that crept into systems that had never been tested beyond theory. Walls that no longer aligned perfectly. Floors that dipped by fractions of a degree. Doors that opened half a second too slowly. As if the station itself was thinking through every action and failing to keep up. Elias noticed all of it, and none of it surprised him anymore. A distant sound echoed through the corridor, not mechanical, not environmental voices. He followed them. The chamber ahead was larger, centralized, reinforced, but visibly strained. Emergency lighting cast long, uneven shadows across its interior, and inside, the survivors had gathered, dozens of them, different species. Different physiologies, different methods of understanding panic. Some hovered near collapsed consoles. Others clung to structural supports. A few lay motionless beneath emergency blankets provided by failing systems that still tried. Even now, to do their jobs, they looked up as Elias entered. Not with relief. Not immediately. With confusion. Because this wasn't how the story was supposed to go. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be an observation point. Statistic. A failed experiment or a successful joke, depending on who you asked earlier. Instead, he stood in the center of a broken system that had been designed without him in mind, and was still functioning because of him. A medical drone drifted toward him, paused midair, recalibrated, and redirected itself to a collapsed delegate instead. Elias watched it for half a second, then looked around the room. "This everyone?" he asked. No one answered immediately. A flicker of hesitation passed through the group, then a figure stepped forward, one of the assembly coordinators. Its posture was rigid, but its movements lacked earlier certainty. "The core systems are failing," it said. "Containment cannot be restored without external stabilization protocols." Elias nodded once. "Where's the core?" A pause. Too long. Then, "You should not proceed further," the coordinator said. "The area beyond this point is structurally unsound and environmentally incompatible with—" Elias cut it off gently. "Yeah," he said. "I've noticed." Silence followed, not hostile, not dismissive, uncertain, because something had changed in the room, not the station, not the crisis, the perception. The drone still hovered, the alarm still blinked, but attention had shifted toward him. Elias stepped closer to the central console. It flickered as he approached, attempting to reauthorize access permissions that no longer mattered. He placed a hand on it. The interface stuttered, then stabilized. For the first time, the system seemed unsure whether to reject him or accept him. Data streamed across the display in chaotic bursts. Core integrity, 29% automated response failure, 87% containment. Loop collapse imminent. Elias read it without expression. Behind him, someone spoke quietly. "He should not still be functioning." Another voice answered. "Neither should we." That landed differently. A silence spread through the room, not the empty kind, but the kind that forms when assumptions begin to crack. Elias finally looked away from the console, looked at them, all of them, different shapes, different minds, different expectations of what survival should look like. "You've got a decision point coming up," he said. A delegate shifted. "What decision?" Elias turned slightly, glancing toward the direction of the core access corridor. "Whether you keep treating this like a controlled environment," he said, "or admit it isn't one anymore." No one spoke, because everyone understood what he meant, even if they didn't like it. A sudden vibration ran through the floor deeper than before, more urgent. The station groaned, not audibly but structurally, like something holding itself together out of obligation rather than capability. Elias straightened. Because if you're waiting for it to stabilize, he added quietly, you're already out of time, and for the first time since the chaos began. No system contradicted him. The silence that followed wasn't calm, it was acknowledgement. And somewhere beyond the sealed corridor ahead, something critical just dropped another percentage. The corridor to the core wasn't designed for urgency. It was designed for certainty. That certainty was gone. Elias moved through it anyway, each step now heavier than the last. Not because the gravity had changed, but because the station itself felt like it was resisting being walked through. Panels flickered overhead in broken sequences. Emergency lights failed to agree on color, blinking between amber white and a dim, uncertain red. The air grew colder. Not naturally, systemically, a failing attempt to stabilize a region that no longer had rules. Behind him, the survivors followed at a distance. Not all of them, not most, but enough that his movement had become something more than individual action. It had become direction, a path, and in a collapsing system, paths mattered more than intentions. The final bulkhead stood ahead, massive, reinforced, still intact. For now. Across its surface, warning glyphs pulsed in unstable rhythms. Core access. Restricted autonomous override locked structural integrity. Critical Elias stopped in front of it. He didn't speak immediately. For the first time since the incident began, there was no immediate motion around him. No collapsing corridor, no screaming systems, just the low, constant vibration of a station, trying not to die. He placed a hand on the door. It was warm, too warm. Someone behind him spoke, softly. You cannot open it manually. Elias didn't turn. I've noticed, he said. The statement wasn't defiance, it was observation. He looked at the seam where the doors met, at the locking mechanism buried deep, inside layers of engineered certainty. Everything. Here assumes it won't fail, he added. No one responded because they knew. And now it had. A deep pulse ran through the floor. This one was different. Not structural stress, not atmospheric failure. Core instability. The kind that meant time was no longer a concept the station respected. Elias stepped back slightly, rolled his shoulders once. Motion was slower now. Measured. Not exhaustion exactly, but accumulation. The kind that builds when survival stops being an event and becomes continuous. He looked at the survivors behind him. They still think this is something you wait out? He asked quietly. A pause. No answer. That was answer. Enough. Elias turned back to the door. All right, he said, and then he hit. It not with tools, not with systems, with force. The impact echoed through the corridor like something final, deciding to begin. The bulkhead shuddered, but held for a second. Then Elias stepped in again. Stronger. The second impact bent the outer layer just slightly. Not enough. Third followed immediately. Metal groaned. A seam widened. Behind him, someone shouted something, alarm, warning, disbelief, but it blurred into background noise under the rising rhythm of his effort. Again, each strike less about power, more about refusal. The door wasn't breaking quickly, but it was breaking. And in systems like this, that mattered. A final impact landed harder than the others. The locking mechanism gave a fractured scream of metal and forced computation. Then, it opened, not fully, not cleanly, but enough. A gap widened, spilling pale core light into the corridor like exposure from a wound. Elias didn't hesitate, he stepped through. The core chamber was not what anyone expected. It wasn't a room, it was a condition. Suspended lattice of structure and energy, held together by overlapping systems that now flickered in disagreement. Massive conduits pulsed along the walls, each one struggling to maintain balance with the others. The center of it all, a stabilizing core sphere, rotated unevenly, its alignment drifting in slow, dangerous increments. Every shift sent tremors through the station. Elias stood at the edge. He stared at it for a long moment. "This is what you trusted," he said quietly. Behind him, survivors gathered at the threshold. No one entered. Not yet, because something about the core made instinct hesitate, not fear, recognition. That this was where control ended. Alarms inside the chamber were silent. Now, not because things were fine, because there were too many failures for alarms to prioritize. Elias stepped forward. Each movement closer to the core made the environment harder. Temperature instability, microgravity shifts, radiation fluctuations. Nothing stable enough to map. Nothing predictable enough to trust. He kept going anyway. A maintenance console sparked. Weakly beside him, he slammed his hand onto it. The system flickered, resisted, then partially responded. Data spilled across the screen in fragmented streams. Core stability, 11% autonomous correction, failed emergency shutdown. Impossible. Elias stared at it. "Of course it is," he muttered. A tremor ran through the chamber. Stronger, this time. The core rotated off-axis. Another failure cascade. Beginning. Elias looked up, and for the first time since arriving, he didn't look like someone reacting to a problem. He looked like someone choosing one. Behind him, a voice called out, "What are you doing?" Elias didn't turn. "Fixing it," he said. A pause. "That is not within acceptable parameters." Elias finally glanced back over his shoulder. His expression wasn't angry, wasn't dramatic, just certain. "Yeah," he said. "I've noticed your parameters don't really work right now." The chamber groaned again, stronger. Lights flickered violently as the core shifted further out of alignment. Time was running out in a way that no longer needed measurement. Elias turned fully toward the core, stepped closer, and placed both hands on the nearest control interface. The system hesitated. Then, for the first time since everything began, it accepted input from him, not because it was designed to, but because there was nothing else left to try. And somewhere deep in the station's collapsing intelligence systems, one final alert appeared. External variable now, primary control authority. The universe didn't laugh. Not anymore. It was listening.